Looking at the Passion of Jesus according to Luke's Gospel. So we will work our way through the burial of Jesus. That's the Passion of Jesus. That's the suffering of Jesus. We're looking at Luke's account, and we are finishing the trials, according to Luke's version. We're finishing the trials. If you add the Gospels together, Jesus goes through 6 different iterations of a trial. Before Herod, before Caiaphas, before Annas, before Pilate. And again, I've mentioned several times, in the Gospels, you're told more about the trials than you are about the actual crucifixion. So there's a lot of important stuff that comes out of these trials. But today we're moving away from the trial. We're finishing his appearance before Pontius Pilate, and we are beginning the journey, literally beginning his journey to Calvary. That's probably enough. I will talk to you at some point to make sure you understand the word Calvary is not in your Bible. You know, we spoke Latin in church for so many years. For 1,000 years, Latin was our was our church language. You know, we got away from that in the 16th century. We started letting countries speak their own language. You know, the Roman Catholics just made that decision in the 1960s. But Calvary comes from the Latin Bible, Calvarium. And we'll talk about what that means. It's Golgotha in the Hebrew or the Greek. But we'll talk about Calvary. But we're going to make our journey, begin our journey to Calvary, and he gets on the cross. I may go ahead and get him on the cross today and end there. To start with, on Luke 23, that's the chapter we're in. Look at verse 17. This is not a rhetorical question. Do you have a verse 17?
Yes.
See, part of what I like to do if people say this is the Word of God, pay attention to it. You went from 16 to 18, most of you, didn't you? Not King James. The reason you went from 16 to 18, and again, I know because we are in a culture where we don't read closely anymore. We can't concentrate anymore. We can't focus. I love things that teach me to concentrate. Yeah, you know, and mine are actually on 2 pages. My verse 16 is on the page. I turn it's verse 18. If I hadn't paid close attention, I would not have even noticed. There is no verse 17 in the ESV. The reason for that. Now, those of you that have it, like King James, New King James, you may have it in parenthesis. Okay, or you may have it in brackets. You may have a textual note where, like after verse 16, before verse 18, that takes you to the bottom of the page and says when it says MSS, that's manuscripts. Some manuscripts have. Anyway, what does most modern translations? I'm curious, how many do not have a verse 17? Yeah, most modern translations don't, because the best manuscripts we have of the New Testament do not include it. And it's pretty obvious, we know from manuscripts. By the way, when I was in England at the British Library, I saw one of the 2 oldest complete manuscripts of the Bible. It's called the Codex Sinaiticus, which tells you where it was discovered. And we do have manuscripts, and we have lots of manuscripts. But if you look at the oldest manuscripts, which the King James people did not have, if you look at the oldest manuscripts, that verse is not there. And it's pretty apparent what that verse is if you do have it. Somebody has it, read it out to me.
For of necessity he must release one unto them at the feast.
Somebody added that to help you understand what was going on. That was just a kind of an editorial remark about what you're getting ready to see about Barabbas.
C.S. Lewis does that a lot in his writings. He has little italicized things in there.
I mean, he gives you a lot of editorial remarks. Yeah. You know, but that one evidently made it into some biblical manuscripts. You know, where whoever's the scribe, which everything had to be written by hand, you know, wanted to make sure you understand. Because what we're getting ready to look at is called the Passover pardon. Now, you probably didn't wake up this morning thinking about the Passover pardon. If you were first century in Jerusalem, you probably knew about it. So that's just an example. Somebody was trying to help the reader out to understand what's getting ready to happen with Barabbas and Jesus. But the best manuscripts don't have it, which is why your modern manuscripts don't have it. I just like to point out, I've got this concern as I'm getting older. I used to forget nothing. I forget things now. So I'm doing something about it. I try to exercise my brain all that I can. My wife says don't dispense medical knowledge or medical diagnosis. I won't go beyond that. But there's things I'm doing for my memory. But I do like to make sure I'm reading closely. And therefore I notice there's no 17 there. Anyway, that's your trivia for today. Now get into the text. Look at verse 18. But they all cried out together. Again, inquiring minds, who are they all? It's the religious leaders that want to kill Jesus. Now, going back to last week, what is the religious crime that they're accusing Jesus of? Blasphemy. He's claiming to be one with God. He's claiming to be of the same nature of God. He's claiming to be son of God, offspring of God. He's claiming to be Messiah. He's claiming to be the Son of Man who's going to come on the clouds. Yeah, that's blasphemy, according to these religious leaders. But the Jewish religious leaders that get to rule in Jerusalem, as long as Rome's not in town, they get to rule on behalf of Rome, as long as Rome's not in town. The Jewish religious leaders don't have the right to carry out capital punishment. So they have to go to the Roman authority who is in town, because what is happening right now in town? Passover. Jews from around the world, you're going to meet one in a minute that came all the way from northern Africa. Jews from around the world are coming to Passover to celebrate. That's a festival of freedom and liberation. So the Romans always got concerned when the Jews would get together in mass. And you see all kinds of numbers. Some of the ancient historians say that Jerusalem would go to 2 million people. Jerusalem and the surrounding area. So the Romans always got really concerned when that many Jews got together and started celebrating freedom and liberation and celebrating the Passover, the freedom from Egypt. So Rome does come to town. So when Rome comes to town, the Sadducees, the people who ran the temple and therefore ran Jerusalem, they had to yield to the Romans. This is going to come into play. Had the Jews, but Jesus prophesied this. Again, Luke's gospel, Jesus is in control. Jesus is the judge. Jesus is calling the shots. And Jesus prophesied how he would die throughout the earlier parts of the gospel. And he never said, well, actually, I'll say it in a minute. He prophesied how he would die. And it could not have been at the hands of Jews. Because how did Jews carry out capital punishment? Think about Stephen. Stoning. That's the way Jews they didn't know about crucifixion. Crucifixion was something that the Assyrians, the Persians did. You read about it in the book of Esther. Persians did it, the Assyrians did it. The Romans perfected it. And we will get to look at some of the gory details, particularly next week, about what crucifixion was. It was the most humiliating, the most painful form of execution that human beings ever created, because they wanted it to be a deterrent to anybody coming against the power of Rome. And usually you would be on that cross for days before you died. And that we have historical evidence of more than 1,000 people at one time being crucified. Because when Rome wanted to send a message, they sent a message. Well, early on, so the Romans have to be the ones to kill Jesus, because Jesus said stuff like, John 12, if I be lifted up, I will draw all people to me. And of course, in John's gospel, you always read John's gospel on two different levels. If I be exalted, the world will come to me. That's why you see Greeks coming to him right after he says that. But he meant it literally too. If I be lifted up. The way they stoned you, by the way, usually the way they stoned you was not just throw rocks at you. They'd throw you off a hill and pile rocks on top of you. So really with stoning, you were not lifted up, you were thrown down. But Jesus prophesied, I will be lifted up. So he pretty much said, even when he's saying stuff like which he said early in the gospel, if you want to follow me, you have to deny yourself and pick up what? That's not the Jewish world. So he's already told you, he's in control. He's going to be crucified. So it has to be Rome that does it. And that's why the Romans are involved, because they're in town. They are the ultimate authority in the Roman Empire. But these Jewish religious leaders, they have to turn the religious accusation into a political one. The Romans could not care less about a religious squabble among Jews that they had a hard time understanding the Jewish people. So it has to become a political, and it does. Again, this text teaches us a great deal about the way we function, the political heart of the human being, and we all have it. We all want to get our way and get our agenda and promote our will and our wishes. This past, and I think that's why the Gospels show you so much about these trials, to show you the human. We all have a political heart, because we want to get our ways. We want to make happen what we want to make happen. And again, part of the Christian faith is submitting our will to somebody else's will. Deny yourself, pick up your cross. But we love to support our wills. And you see such an amazing, powerful picture here of the political heart of the human beings, which again paves the way for the cross. We need to be saved in so many ways. Human sinfulness is so deep. And it's the cross that saves us. So these political leaders, they carry him to Pontius Pilate. We talked about last week how they got him out of bed early. Pontius Pilate passed him off to Herod, because Herod ruled on behalf of Pontius Pilate in Galilee. And of course, Herod was in Jerusalem for Passover too. So the Galilean puppet ruler was in Jerusalem. So Pontius Pilate said, here's my loophole. Let me pass the buck. Send him to Herod. Well, what does Herod do? Sends him back to Pontius Pilate. Because again, and you're going to see it, what Luke wants you to see is how many times Jesus gets declared innocent. Actually, in case you missed the math, Luke's getting ready to remind you of it. So I'll hold off on the other times. Keep going. So the all here, the people who are trying to kill Jesus, they take him to Pontius Pilate again, away with this man, and released us Barabbas. That's the Passover pardon that we don't know much about outside the New Testament, which is why somebody probably thought they had to help us out and give us some editorial instructions. But what it looks like was going on, we just call it the Passover pardon, is that at Passover, and we can, this does not stretch our imagination. Pontius Pilate tried to keep the peace, to try to win favor of a people that really hated him, detested him. In Luke 13, you read about how many Galileans he killed at one fell swoop. So the Jewish people hated their overlord, but he would do this, try to win some favor at Passover. So I do want to talk, before I get out of here, I'm going to talk about peer pressure. I'm going to talk about wanting peace so badly that you'll kill an innocent man. Yeah, there's a lot of instruction here about human nature. So Passover pardon. Now, and I started it last week. Here's Barabbas. And you're going to be told here, look at the next phrase, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. So here's a rebel, an insurrectionist, a lestes is what it says in the Greek, and where that becomes important, Jesus will get crucified between two other lestes or lestoi. So a lestes, and that usually gets, sometimes it's translated robbers. But Rome didn't tend to crucify you for pickpocketing. Lestes is probably better insurrectionist, rebel. Somehow they went against the power of Rome. Anyway, you got the two on either side of Jesus when you get to the crucifixion. And Barabbas is one of those. He's a lestes. He's an insurrectionist. But notice Luke says, as an insurrectionist, he had murdered people. So let me make sure you are introduced to Barabbas. I started off last week, I did. Bar means what in Hebrew? And you know it's Simon Bar Jonah, or a bar mitzvah. Bar means son of. You know what Abbas means? Son of the Father. So pick up what the Bible's putting down here, and I'm going to show you something that, here's Barabbas, here's Pontius Pilate saying, here's son of the Father, here's another son of the Father. Which one do you want? Do you want this political kingdom, this insurrectionist, this patriot, this good Jew, son of the Father? Or do you want this preacher who has talked about a kingdom, but he doesn't seem to be interested in the politics? He doesn't seem to be interested in making Jerusalem great again like it was under David. Which son of the Father do you want? Now that I've introduced you to textual biblical studies, let me, because just a few of you will have this. I'm not sure King James has this. So if you look, Barabbas is mentioned, the Passover pardon's mentioned in all four Gospels. Go look at Matthew 27, verse 16. Matthew 27, 16. Depending on what kind of translations I've got in the room, this is an amazing. It's not in some manuscripts, but it is in some manuscripts. And that's why it's in some English translation, Matthew 27, 16. Now, when you get to 27:16, and ESV doesn't even do this, if you read 27:16, or if there's a textual note, a little bitty letter that takes you not to a study note, but takes you to the bottom of the text, that's where that textual note, like a little letter, takes you to the bottom of the text, says, some manuscripts add. In 27:16, do any of you have another name given for Barabbas other than Barabbas? Jesus. So how many of you either have it in the text, or you have a study note or a textual note that takes you to the bottom that says, some manuscripts say Jesus? How many of you have that? I'm just curious, what are your translations? Well, look on the back of your Bible. What is your translation? New Living Translation. I like the New Living Translation. So not only is Barabbas called son of the Father, what's his given name, perhaps? Jesus. What is being shown to you in the Bible here? Which Jesus do you want? Do you prefer the political? Think about our lives right now. Do you spend more time thinking and talking about and being agitated and cogitated about the political Jesuses in the world, or this Jesus, the Son of the Heavenly Father? Which Jesus do you want? Well, you see which one the crowd chose. I'm just amazed that I don't hear Christians talk about this more. To me, this is one of the most powerful spots in the Gospels. When, Pontius Pilate doesn't know what he's doing. Pontius Pilate, he knows a little bit of Hebrew. They communicated in Greek. He speaks Latin as a Roman. So I'm sure he probably does not know what Barabbas means. He doesn't even know that means son of the Father. And he probably doesn't know what Barabbas' given name was, Yeshua, Jesus. So you got two Jesus' sons of the Father. Isn't that sort of mind-blowing? One of the reasons, for those of you doing the Mere Christianity study, and I'm going to make sure you create a list of ways to support the Christian faith, not using the Bible, so that you can support the Christian faith to the world around you. Who, if you say what the Bible says, you might as well be saying, Marvel Comics says, because they don't see the Bible as an authority. But Mere Christianity will help you proclaim, evangelize, using reason. But one of the things C.S. Lewis says is this religion, this faith, these gospels, the faith we couldn't have made this up. Or as he says in his English from 1940s, it could not be guessed. What he meant was, it can't be made up. Son of God comes to earth, incarnation, gets killed as a criminal. Hollywood could not do this. There's no author out there that could do this. So again, another good, reasonable explanation and defense for your faith. So, this is good stuff. Jesus, Barabbas, which one do you want? Well, you already know which one this crowd's going to want. Because again, and again, let me show this. Barabbas, because you know Christian theology, Barabbas is guilty. He's a murderer. Not only has offended the law of Rome, but he's a murderer. That offends everybody's law. He is guilty. So Jesus is going to die in the place of the guilty. You know that from Christian theology. Yeah, Glenn.
Do you have any opinion about how...
Oh, I'm sure I have an opinion. Don't even ask that, Glenn. It may be totally wrong, but I'm sure I'll have an opinion.
How the Pharisees were able to... Do you think they paid off some of these people?
I do. And that's a good point, because in just a moment, for the first time in Luke's gospel, he's going to tell you there's a crowd with these leaders. You know, Luke usually loves the crowd. The crowds love Jesus. And Luke wants you to see it is the religious leaders protecting their political status, their power, their income, the power that they wielded when Rome wasn't in town. They were threatened by the holiness of Jesus. They were threatened by the popular people who liked Jesus. In just a minute, you're going to see a crowd. Now, again, I've said this because it needs to be said. Every Jew in Jerusalem did not kill Jesus. During the Middle Ages, we killed a lot of Jews, blaming them for killing Jesus. That was wrong. It's the Jewish religious leaders. And by the way, if you've been to Israel, you know the streets are so narrow. Now, in Hollywood, it looks like the Roman Forum. There's 5,000 Jews out there screaming, crucify him, crucify him. That's not reality. In just a moment, you're going to see a little crowd. And yes, I do think they paid him off. Yes, they went and specifically we're still pretty early in the morning. Remember Mark's gospel. By 9 a.m., he's on the cross. So you have to get somebody out of bed to participate in this. So I think it's a well-selected, if it's not the Jewish religious leaders, I think it's bribe, coercion, my best friend, my son-in-law, whoever. They do manage to have a little crowd there. But it's not all the Jews. Yeah, Laura.
Aren't there people circulating among the crowd that kind of like start the chanting, to where if somebody else
Hollywood shows it that way. So, again, there's not that big of a crowd. You probably have nobody here at this time of the morning in these narrow streets that are about half the size of this room outside. And go with me to Jerusalem. I'll show you where the Hasmonean Palace was. They didn't have these big that's why in Hollywood it looks like the Forum, where thousands can get. So this is a well-selected group. Again, and Luke, this is why he's going to, I don't want to say slip up, this is the Word of God, but he's going to kind of slip up and show that there are people present other than just the religious leaders. So, yes, that's why we only started after World War II, when that good Lutheran, Protestant, Christian nation decided they were going to kill all Jews, using some of Luther's theology. We only started after World War II saying, please don't read this in such a way that you want to go kill Jews. And that's when we start. Think about the movies in the 1950s. Ben-Hur, King of Kings. Yeah, every Jew in the city was already up and out there shouting. So in the movies, they're telling everybody, they're working the crowd. There's not even hardly a crowd.
But I think mine says the multitude. That's normally,
King James, yeah.
That's normally a large group.
Well, it would be for us, but it's like in England when 40 of us showed up for church for evensong at Windsor, and the security guard looked at me and said, are all of y'all going to church tonight? And I wanted to say,
It's the multitude.
for them it was a multitude. In England, for church, it was, and I'm like, this isn't, if the guy hadn't been holding a machine gun, I'd have probably said something snarky to him. But he was the security at Windsor Castle at St. George's Chapel. So multitude. Yeah, again, the people who translated the King James had never been to the Middle East. And that's why, and some people who make movies, some people who do like that Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper, look at the size of that. That is a Roman room they're in. Big windows, stone. That's not Middle East. So now since World War II, and the world's become smaller, we also have the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of us have been multiple times in Israel. I'm looking forward to my 10th time, but my mentor for one of my degrees has been there 76 times. doing archaeological stuff. So we know a whole lot more than they knew in 1603 or whatever with the King James. And that's why we have better manuscripts. But Hollywood was not real swift. Every time I watch the movie, I like to get to the end and see the credits and see who their, and sometimes there is no such person, who their scholar is that they're using for the production. And it's usually a name I've never seen or heard, or there's nobody even given that title. They asked their grandmother what they thought it looked like. And yeah, again, and after World War II, the Holocaust, we said, we got to learn how to read our text. Again, all of these texts are written by Jews. So if you're going out and killing Jews and blaming all the Jewish people like we did for 1,500 years, because not only did they kill Jesus, once we proclaimed Jesus was God, they accused Jews of deicide. God showed up and you killed them. Well, God showed up and these religious leaders protecting their status and their position killed them. That's why they have to have him on the cross by 9 a.m. These 6 trials are kangaroo courts going on here. Yeah, Priscilla. Probably. Greek is much, I don't have my Greek New Testament in front of me, but Greek is a wonderful, wonderful language. Like, for instance, remember this next week. The word for cross, stauros. I'm going to show you in a moment. Stauros. Now, you have all these medieval paintings of Jesus walking down the street carrying a cross. Well, he didn't. He carried the patibulum. He carried the crossbeam. That's all he carried. Now, that's 40 pounds. He won't be able to sustain it. You're going to need Simon to help. So stauros means a stake, which is why if you read the book of Esther, it's really clear. It's a stake. But that's when the Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking on your door and they say, you can't use the symbol of a cross because I'm looking at, there's crosses in those doors right there. You can't use the symbol of the cross because it's a stake. Well, it is, but what did the Romans do? You carried the crossbeam and nailed the crossbeam to the stake that stayed there. They were smart people. They reused the stakes. Everybody had just an individual crossbeam. So the word stauros does mean just stake. So the Jehovah's Witnesses are right when they tell you that. Say, well, what did Jesus carry when he went there, and what did they do with it when he got there? Well, that made the Latin cross when you nailed it to it. So just like the 4 words for love, there's very specific words for love in the Greek language. English is so impoverished. We love spaghetti and we love our wives and we love God. At that point, the word love means nothing. But yeah, I'm sure there is. I'll try to remember to look and come back and tell you. But just giving the time, the structure, the city. Yeah, you don't have big crowds yet. They know what they're doing as far as getting this done in the night. And that's why, I think I told you that when me and my Jewish tour guide, who's wonderful, who knows more New Testament than a lot of Christians I know, he has never, he even gets sensitive when I start going after the religious leaders. Because the Jews say this cannot be historic. Their leaders would have never done this. They would have violated many Jewish laws to have trials in the night, to have kangaroo courts, 6 of them, to get Jesus on the cross by 9 o'clock. And I sort of gently say to my Jewish friend, I understand. This would be like saying George Washington was a bigamist. Yeah, because he's also a relative of mine. But yeah, for a lot of reasons, you go after George Washington, it's going to offend me. But it's in my Bible. But more importantly for me, well, not more importantly, but human nature supports this. Political people, people with status, people with money, people in control, they will do bad things. They will violate their own laws to keep themselves in power. So, when all these trials and the religious leaders offend the Jewish people, because Pharisees and Sadducees are wonderful people, just not up to Jesus' standard. When Jesus says your righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees, they have righteousness. Just our righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees. It has to be more of an internal thing for us, a heart thing. So the Pharisees and Sadducees are heroes for the Jewish people. So, and again, don't even blame all the Pharisees. It's mostly Sadducees here in Jerusalem doing this, protecting their status. Because when Rome is not in town, which they never are, except for high holidays, they get to rule. Yeah, you can go with me to Jerusalem sometime. I'll take you down there underneath the city where the homes of Sadducean leaders have been excavated. They had palatial homes. They were not the common people. They lived well under Roman occupation. So it's important to know, Jesus died for our sin. And, that's the whole doctrine of atonement and what that means. Go read Romans chapter 1 through 8. But as far as what historically came together to kill Jesus, we need to be clear, because it was Christians, I'm putting that quotation marks, in Germany who decided all Jews had to be killed. But it's only after World War II that we started reading the New Testament as Jewish documents. So if you read the New Testament and condemn all Jews, you've missed out that this is a Jewish document. Jews wrote this. So, I don't think they condemned all the Jewish people, but the Jewish religious leaders. And that is important because, again, we've seen the movies. That's why you've heard me saying, I'm going to move on. That's why I don't like passion plays. Every 10 years, I don't know about now. I want to go to Abramagal. I'll use any excuse to go travel. Abramagal, the passion play that's put on every 10 years in that city, it started in the 14th century to thank God that they were preserved from the Black Death or the plague. Well, there's two reasons. It's long, it's in German, and it's a passion play. Because I know what happened historically in the Middle Ages. We would have passion plays. In our passion plays, we put as many Jews out there screaming at Jesus as we could. Usually in Europe, in the Middle Ages, after the passion play, people went out and killed Jews that they could find. So, don't invite your Jewish friend to a passion play. Because that's kind of like talking to a Muslim about crusades. They're not going to respond well on that one. Mm-hmm. By the time he's hanging at 9 a.m., there's people milling around. There's people doing stuff, but they were not part of the kangaroo courts. They're not in Pilate's house. They didn't go visit Herod. So again, when he's on the cross, crowds, and you're going to see a crowd follow him out. They would start, the crowds, we did it in the United States with hangings. So it always brings a crowd out of sympathy or entertainment or curiosity. And again, that's why you crucify outside the city. Because you crucify outside the city on a road leading into the city. Because you wanted everybody possible to see the agony. We'll talk about what the agony of crucifixion is. They want you to see the person in agony for 2 or 3 days. Again, Mark gives you the chronology. 9 a.m., he's on the cross. All this is done. So even what we're getting ready to look at with these women who are following him, we're still pretty early in the morning. And during Passover, and I think I told this when we were in the Garden of Gethsemane, during Passover, to this day, during Passover, Jews stay up very late. Jews also, they didn't go through the American Prohibition movement. Jews also stay up very late, feasting, partying, drinking. So when you have Jesus on the cross by 9 a.m., he's on the cross, according to Mark, by 9 a.m. That's why he's out of the city. All of it's done. So probably by 8 a.m., this is getting ready to happen. Yeah, there's some milling about, but there's still some resting, sleeping late because they had a really good time at Passover. That's why they're in Jerusalem at this point. So again, I'm a little passionate about protecting my Jewish friends. So that's why, whether there's Jewish prejudice, because again, I've always told you, every time I take somebody to Israel, by a group to Israel, by about the second day, somebody comes up to me and says, "So Jesus was a Jew?" And I'm like, "Duh." Yeah, no, I'm really respectful and polite. Yes, he was a Jew. They all were, except for the Romans that showed up not having a clue what was going on. So yeah, as Christians, two-thirds. Yes, two-thirds actually, not three-quarters. Two-thirds of our Bible is the Jewish Bible. So yeah, we have a Jewish Savior. So, when people ask me all the time, and I'll move on, this is a topic for another discussion. Why is anti-Semitism so popular? It's a spiritual thing. There's a reason we've always, even though we should know better, there's a reason even we have tried to kill the Jews. We've tried to silence them. We've tried to push them away. But these are Jewish people. So make sure you know who the crowd is here, because he is getting ready to say there's a crowd with these leaders. But again, that's a matter of perspective. Back to Barabbas. He's a hero, so certainly they want him. He's a political leader. He's a patriot. They like their politicians. They like the people. The friend of my friend, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, yeah, he's been killing Romans. So the crowd likes him. And he deserved to die. Again, Jesus is going to die. Jesus, the innocent one, the sinless one, is going to die for the guilty one here. So yeah, don't miss this Barabbas stuff. Okay, move on. We got to make a little bit of headway here. This is good. Again, you're going to probably know more about the Passion of Christ than the average person in High Point when you get out of here. And I'll be grateful for that. This is the center of our faith. There are crosses all over. One time I took a confirmation class into a sanctuary. I said, count the number of crosses. And that was fun because they saw the big one up there. They came back like 21, 27. They didn't notice there was a cross on the front of every hymnal. And there was like 300 crosses in that sanctuary. Yeah, we make a big deal of the cross. So you need to know what's going on here. Look at verse 29, because this Luke wants you to see is Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to do what? Release Jesus. So keep reading. Released it, but they kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Our politics and to protect our status will make us do evil things. Crucify him, crucify him. Well, Luke wants you to notice in verse 22, a third time, Pontius Pilate says, why? What evil has he done? I have found no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him. So 3 times Pilate has said he is innocent. Guess what? Only in Luke's gospel, one of the thieves is going to declare what about Jesus? He is innocent. Only in Luke's gospel, centurion at the cross, when Jesus expires, when Jesus dies, what's that centurion going to say? You'll see it. He is innocent. So Jesus is innocent. Luke knew Paul. So Luke knew Paul's preaching about what the atonement is. The perfect, unblemished Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So we got to keep Jesus innocent and perfect and unblemished and sinless. Yeah, and don't feel sorry for Pilate. I've had moments where I felt sorry for Pilate. I mean, not only is he giving in, he's the leader. He's the head honcho. He's got the Roman Empire behind him. But again, you've heard me say the Roman Empire, as long as you paid your taxes and kept the peace, they were fine with you. Well, here's Pontius Pilate, head honcho. Peer pressure and a desire to keep the peace. And remember, I've preached it multiple times, Jesus does not say, blessed are the peacekeepers. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. If you're one of these people that just want to keep the peace, you cannot have any conflict. You cannot have any controversy. God forbid there's anybody mad at you out there. God forbid there's anybody out there criticizing you. I feel your pain, but be careful. That's what Pilate was doing. He's trying just to appease the crowd. Another good term, appeasement. He's trying to appease the crowd. He wants them to be peaceful. He just wants them to shut up and go home because he knows Rome will come down on him if he doesn't keep the peace in there. I like peace. I really do. I like it a whole bunch. But I always remember Martin Luther talking to Christian people, he said, may God deny you peace to grant you glory. So be careful about what all you will do. On Facebook, you know, I see all sorts of nonsense. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. And some things I like knowing about, some things it's not. I see people thinking about, well, I just walked away from that person to keep the peace. Well, that person might have been in need. That person might have, I don't know. You know, people who will walk, I mean, I'm a big fan of peace and a big fan of joy. I protect my peace and my joy well. But God has sent me into places where peace and joy may not be always an option. Some of you quelch my peace from time to time. Some of you quelch my joy from time. And again, if you make peace the most important thing in your life, Pontius Pilate at this point did. He's trying to figure, what does he physically do in Matthew's gospel? That is now part of our idioms in our language. He washed his hands of the whole thing. So don't feel sorry. His desire to keep the peace, his desire to yield to peer pressure, his desire to appease, as the power, he kills an innocent man. So, yeah, peer pressure, appeasement, desire to keep the peace. You know, there's times for that, but don't feel sorry for Pontius Pilate. You know, I told you last week, I believe, or whenever we talked about Pontius Pilate, the Coptic Christians have made him into a saint. You know, because he listened to his wife, he listened to his wife's dream, he goes on, becomes a Christian, according to them. He dies, he's buried in Switzerland at Mount Pilatus. That is a tradition, post-biblical tradition. I don't even like it because, you know, I'm watching Pilate, the strong Pilate. And we have a lot, he ruled for 10 years. We have a lot of historical evidence of Pilate. He could be strong. Chapter 13, he killed thousands of Galileans. He could be strong. He folds like a cheap suit right here because he wants to keep the peace. Here are the leaders of the Jewish people, and he wants to keep the peace. I think particularly Luke, who keeps having 3 times, you hear Pilate say, he's innocent. I don't find him guilty of anything. Would you please let it go? I mean, I just hear Pilate whining. He's the power. So you got to be careful of peer pressure and what you'll do for peace and quiet. Yeah, I mean, he's wanting peace and quiet. Look what he's doing. So for a third time, verse 23, but they were urgent. You know, give me another. Urgent is probably a good translation of the Greek, which is why I like ESV. I don't know that it gets the point across in verse 23. Instead of they were urgent, they were what?
Insistent.
That's probably better. They were insistent. The crowd here, which is these Jewish religious leaders, they are insistent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified. And their voices prevailed. That's one of the saddest passages in the New Testament for me. Now again, God's got it. Jesus is in control. This is going to become our salvation. But don't let these people off the hook. You know, the Bible never hesitates to condemn Judas or these people. And their voices prevailed. Sometimes the loudest voices prevail. The people that can do the best PR work prevail. You know, and their voices prevailed. Verse 24, so Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He wants to keep the peace. He likes peace and quiet. He probably won't go back to bed. It's still early in the morning. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder. Luke wants to make sure you know murder. He is guilty. For whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. Yeah, we got to watch our wills. So I got to get you on the cross. Look at verse 26. And as they led him away, they seized one. These are the Roman soldiers. They seized one, Simon of Cyrene. Simon of Cyrene, if you have a study note, where is Cyrene located in the ancient world? Libya, northern Africa. This is a dark-skinned man. Don't care what the paintings showed you that were done in the Middle Ages by people who had never been outside of Rome. This is a dark-skinned man, Simon of Cyrene. We know where this is. He's Jewish. There was a lot of Jews scattered all around the world in the first century. He's coming to Passover. He's a dark-skinned man, which allows might almost exacerbated Rome, the Roman soldiers conscripting him, impressing him into service. Because they could make you serve them for 1 Roman mile, which is why Jesus says go the 2nd mile and just shock the Romans. They can make you serve them for 1 mile. So they do that with Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and they laid on him the cross, read cross beam, read patibulum. We know what that is, 30 or 40 pounds that he's carrying what we nailed onto the stake to carry it behind Jesus. By the way, don't miss what Luke is putting down here for you. Here is, we know, or you're going to know in a minute, we think strongly. This impacted Simon. This impacted Simon. I think it changed Simon's life. I think Simon became a Christian. I'm going to tell you why in a minute. It's not just because I feel that way. I think Simon became a Christian. The reason I think that, if you read Mark's account of this, about Simon of Cyrene, Mark's going to mention Simon of Cyrene and tell you, oh, by the way, church, that's Alexander and Rufus's father. Why in the world would Mark say that? Because Alexander and Rufus is in the community now. So Alexander and Rufus became early Christians. Mark references them. You know, I can't imagine that they don't become Christians because of what Dad experienced right here. But also pick up what Luke is putting down. You've already read multiple times, if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you've got to deny yourself, your will, your wants, your wishes, your agenda. Deny yourself. Pick up your what? And do what? Here's a picture. Here's Simon picking up the cross of Jesus and following behind him. Luke tells you at the end of verse 26, following behind Jesus. Here's a picture of a disciple. If you want an object lesson, you have to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow behind Jesus. Don't run ahead of Jesus. Don't tell Jesus where to go. Follow behind Jesus. That's really important here. By the way, just to make sure, why is Jesus unable to carry the cross beam any further? He has lost so much blood. He has been beaten. He's been scourged. He has been beaten with what's called a flagrum, which was a whip. Romans, we have a lot of Roman history out there. He's beaten with a whip that has multiple leather straps, and in those multiple leather straps are embedded pieces of metal and rock, so that when they whip you 39 times, because the Jews would allow you to be whipped 40 times, but you might have missed one, so you have to stop at 39. So the Romans, to try to keep the peace, would only whip 39 times. But when you whip somebody, flog somebody, scourge somebody 39 times, you have so lacerated their back. They've lost massive amounts of blood. Mel Gibson got this right. I mean, what you see depicted in The Passion of the Christ is right. He was bloodied. And then you put the crown of thorns, more blood. He was blood. So he's lost so much blood, which is another reason, when they go to break his legs so that he will die quickly, he's already dead. He shocked the people how quickly he died on the cross. Well, part of it's God's will. He's in control, but he's lost so much blood by this point. So he can't even continue to carry the cross. So they had to find, they impressed Simon to do it. And then I can do the rest real fast, because the rest is only in Luke. Only in Luke. Verse 27, there followed him a great multitude of people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, this is Jesus' last extended exhortation. After this, he only says brief sentences. Or he's on the cross dying. He can't have long conversations. This is not a long conversation because of the condition he's in. But notice his last extended conversation, extended in quotation marks, according to Luke. He turned to the women there who were lamenting him. Jesus turned and said, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, not blessed are you that have a bunch of babies. That's typical Judaism. That's typical Bible. But there's coming a day when the people say, blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. So blessed are those who never had children. Then they begin to say to the mount, then they will begin to say, the people that are mourning, that are lamenting, because there's going to come a day when they will do this. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. He's quoting from the book of Hosea. For if they do these things when the wood is green, like right now, in this moment, as they're following behind Jesus, lamenting Jesus, if the Romans do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? Oh, and by the way, just to get you on the cross, 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. Yeah, we're going to be on the cross next week. What in the world what's he saying to these women? You know, don't lament for me. There's coming a time, it's going to be so bad that you'll say, blessed are those that did not have children. You'll say, mountains cover us, hills hide us. Now, again, most Americans, it's all about us, our culture, our history. He's talking about the year 70 A.D. We know this. The destruction of Jerusalem. And when this is about 33 A.D., by 70 A.D., the Romans have had it with these cantankerous, weird, eccentric, strange Jews, because now they're rebelling. In 70 A.D., 66 to 70 A.D., 73 A.D. They're rebelling. So, before they did the rebellion, there was civil war in the city of Jerusalem, because a lot of Jews said, this won't end well if we rebel against Rome. They were the smart Jews. The other Jews, they were rebelling. So we have lots of documentation. Rome says enough. They come in, they destroy Jerusalem. That's when the temple is destroyed. Big deal to the Jews. They just had their holiday where they are still mourning the destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70 AD. Big deal, big deal, big deal. More traumatic than 9/11 for Americans. Big deal. The destruction of the temple is behind all the Gospels, because all the Gospels are written right around the time the temple's destroyed. Now, the reason that's so influential for us Christians, don't start your evangelism talk with your Jewish friends with this one. We think that we saw the destruction of Jerusalem as God's judgment for killing the Son of God. And it was bad. By the way, talking about the barren women, we have a lot of document from Josephus. The Civil War and then the siege by the Romans and the final destruction was so bad. The famine was so bad. They starved to death inside Jerusalem. Josephus wrote that people ate their own babies. So again, you may not know the trauma of 70 A.D. Everybody that read these documents knew the trauma of 70 A.D. So, and Jesus, in control, prophet, he knows what's coming. He says, if the Romans do something like this when the wood's green, an innocent man who's not guilty, what will the Romans do when the wood is dry? Yeah, they're going to burn Jerusalem. They're going to burn it to the ground and tear it down. You can still see the stones piled up. Because a lot of things are built by stone in Jerusalem. So what didn't burn, they tore down. That's where the temple went. And we Christians did sort of say, maybe that's part of God's judgment on what these Jewish religious leaders did. I've kept you too long. Go in peace. We'll be on the cross next week.